What is Spring? Spring is a framework. It's a combination of different technologies. It is actually lightweight, loosely coupled, used to develop enterprise applications. Here, lightweight means which occupies less memory. Loosely coupled, we can implement multiple modules parallel and integrate. It actually given a lot of class and interfaces. We can also call it predefined API to perform database operations like CRUD applications, RESTful web services, integrating one application to another application, microservices, and security concepts. We can even develop distributed applications in a very faster manner. Like you can take banking applications, e-commerce applications and all. It is mainly for developing backend applications. Second question, what are the features of Spring Framework? Spring has a lot of features. The first one is a predefined template. We have JDBC template, Hibernate template, REST template, JMS template. So templates are the classes which reduces boilerplate code. If you write JDBC program, we have to write a lot of code like connection, statement, result set and all. That is replaced by using JDBC template. In the same way, other templates also. Second, loosely coupling. Loose coupling can be implemented using layers mechanism like presentation layer, service layer, and data access layer. If one layer or one module is modified, it will not affect another layer or a module. That is called loose coupling. Here, coupling means connecting two modules or two layers, anything. So that is, if we improve or enhance to next version, it is not going to affect the previous one. Next one is a lightweight. It's actually going to occupy very less memory compared to other technologies and frameworks. Easy to test. We can use JUnit and Mockito to test our applications in an easy way, just to confirm whether our application is working fine or not. It's a powerful abstraction which gives a lot of API frameworks, interface, and abstract classes, and it gives only required features to be implemented. It's a fast development. We can also call it RAD, rapid application development, because of its API and all. Third question, what is dependency injection? One of the mostly asked question. The simple concept of dependency injection, nothing but linking the objects or injecting the objects to a dependent class. Consider we have A class and B class. A class needs B object, then B object should be given to A. So creating the B object and giving to A is nothing but actually injecting the dependency. So this dependency injection mechanism mainly to create the object in the order and inject one to another in the automation process. For this, we need to write a configuration code. That configuration we can write in XML format, or else we can use some annotation process. It is also called manifest files or meta files even. Question number 4. What are the types of dependency injections? There are mainly 5 types of dependency injections. Constructor injection. Object is created by using parameterized constructor and values are injected. We can also use setter injection. In this case, a default constructor is used and setter method is actually called. Field injection. It's a new type of injection. We generally use @auto-void. Circular injection. Though it is mentioned as a type, it should be implemented using a setter concept only internally. That's why some people may not consider it as a type of injection, but actually it is. So A is actually depending on B object and B is depending on A object in the circular manner. Lookup method injection. This is also a special case. This actually occurs in case of scopes mechanism. If two objects are connected, And the first class is actually scope is singleton, and second one is actually prototype scope. Then we are going to use this mechanism, lookup method injection. But mostly constructor and setter injections only used in real times. What is IOC in Spring? IOC stands for inversion of control. In simple, we can also call it Spring container. Dependency injection mechanism is implemented. That means object creation, managing, linking, lifecycle implementations, everything is taken care by Spring container itself. It is called as IOC. This IOC container asks us to provide some inputs by giving XML configurations or annotations. Of course, we have to define our classes, everything we need to provide as an input. Question number 6. What is Spring configuration file? If I want to tell container to create the object, we need to give information like what is the class name, what is the object name, how many classes are there, how many objects required. Everything we need to write in an XML file. That XML file is going to provide entire information and their links about that. That's actually called a configuration file. This is also called as XML configuration file. You can look at the sample code. The bean tag indicates object, property indicates setter method. Okay, you can identify ID means object name, class means fully qualified class name. Question 7. What is a Spring Bean? In simple words, object is also called as object. This object is completely created, linked with another objects, and destroyed by Spring container itself. Okay, this completely controlled by Spring container. An object, that entire process controlled by Spring IOC container is actually called as Spring Bean. These objects are of course completely taken care of configuration file. With the help of the configuration file, completely taken care by Spring container here. Question number 8. The difference between constructor and setter injection. It is also one of the mostly asked interview question. Constructor and setter, if you look at the differences, if a class has 4 variables and there is a constructor for those variables, then at the time of creating the object, we need to pass entire variables. But setter is not like that. You can set only 2 variables and you can ignore. That is called partial injection. Constructor injection, you must mention all the properties or at least their null values. Okay, that is called no partial injection is possible in constructor, but setter is yes. Constructor injection generally creates always a new object. But if you want to modify, you can use setter injection. Setter injection never creates any new object. Existed one only modifies. If you have multiple properties and you want to pass all in the order, then it's a preferred is constructor injection. No, I want to inject only few fields and later on I'll go for remaining few fields injection. It's recommended to go with the setter injection. Constructor injections, if it is done, then we can modify the data by using setter injection. But we can't use constructor injection continuously to modify the existed values. So the constructor like 1 per object creation. Next question. What are the bean scopes in Spring? So general meaning of scope indicates how long an object is present in the container. There are total 5 scopes, but 5th one is not available now. The first scope indicates singleton. This scope says a container is going to create only one object for our configuration. Prototype says every time a new object is created when you access that. Request and session related to web application only. Singleton prototype works for any type of application. Request indicates if a browser makes any request or a client application makes any request, An object is created in the Spring container. Once a response is committed, then the object is actually destroyed in the container. Session is nothing but HTTP session. In simple, we can also call login and logout. When you log in, our HTTP session is created, then container creates its related objects. And on logout, our session invalidate or destroyed, container will destroy the object. What is bean wiring? Question number 10. Wiring simple meaning is actually linking two objects. As I mentioned, for example, class A and class B, we have two classes and there are two objects I want to link based on the relations. That linking can be done by writing some ref tag in case of XML. That's actually called wiring. So here, one is actually called dependent object. Second one is called dependency object. In standard words, we can also call injecting dependencies into dependent class object here. That is called bean wiring. Let's take one small example. Here we have employee service and employee repository. A repository object I want to create and inject it to employee service. That is called wiring. Question number 11. What is auto wiring in Spring and what are the different modes it has? So whatever the wiring process we have discussed previously, that should be automated without writing some ref tags or anything. Okay, so container will detect for the class what are the required classes and their objects based on the relationship. That is called association mapping or has a relation. That will choose or pick all the objects and link them. That's called auto wiring. In case of XML, these are given. That is no, by type, by name, constructor, and auto detect. The fifth one is actually removed now. No indicates, it says container, hey, you don't do any auto wiring, I'll do manual wiring. By name and by type comes under setter. Okay, and constructor comes under constructor injection. Internally they used. Question number 12. What is the difference between auto void and inject? The simple answer, both are same. But @auto void is actually given in Spring framework. @inject is actually given by Java EE framework. Both are actually used for dependency injection purpose. Spring supports both, but in case of non-Spring application, EJBs or Java EE applications are there, @inject was used. Okay, there is a concept called Java CDI, context and dependency injection is a mechanism. It is there in Java EE6, but nowadays it is not used much. Okay, we are using @auto void, but still you can use inject also. The point is inject is not from Spring framework. It's actually from Java, pure Java. What is the difference between component and bean? It is also one of the mostly asked question. Okay, both indicates object creation, but the point is, do we have source code? If we have source code, we can open the class. On top of the class, we can write @component. If a class is programmer defined, means we created the class, then we can use @component. If a class is predefined, then you can't modify the existed code. If you feel, then we write Java based configuration by writing @configuration and @bean. Then container will create the object. Question number 14. How many types of IOC containers are there in Spring? Means types of containers in simple. There are mainly two types of containers we have. One is called bean factory. The bean factory is nothing but which takes care of objects creation and destroying and all. This is going to take only XML input, XML configuration we used to call. Second one is the application context. It is also one interface. It internally extends bean factory interface, but it has other features like annotation support, multi-container system, reactive programming, and so on. What is the use of required annotation in Spring framework? Generally, this annotation can be written on top of set methods. Consider you have a variable in a class and that need to be set by using setter injection. Okay, if you don't set the value, default will be null. Then Spring container will never ask, hey, provide the value. If you write @required, container says injecting the value for the field is mandatory. It must be given. Okay, that is actually use of required annotation. Of course, internally, even auto wiring follows required annotation. Next question. What is the use of auto wide annotation in Spring? If you want to link two beans automatically based on the types detection or injecting the beans, this annotation is used mostly. If you have service layer, repository layer, control layer, one layer you want to link with another layer, okay, we can write @auto-wide. Even you can define auto-wide for interface dependencies also. At runtime, it will choose implementation objects. It's actually recommended for field injection mostly. You can see some sample code. So here, service object is linked with repository object. Question number 17. What is the use of qualifier annotation in Spring Framework? Generally, AutoWire will search for implementation object. If there are multiple objects found, then we can choose one object of the child type using qualifier. Consider A and B. A class needs B object, but B is provided three objects, B1, B2, B3. Then at the time of writing AutoWide, I can use qualifier B2, means A object is connected to B object, which is named with B2. Simply we can say manual selection of child object. That actually handles ambiguity mechanism by mentioning manual object. What is primary annotation in Spring? This also to handle same type of issue that is done by qualifier. But this is actually qualifier we will write at the time of writing AutoWire, but primary will write at the time of bean creation. If we feel there are multiple objects possible available for a child, then we decide by using primary before qualifier, or if no qualifier is used, with the highest priority. Question number 19. What are lifecycle methods in Spring? There are two lifecycle methods, init method and destroy method. They are actually called lifecycle methods in Spring. These methods are executed by Spring container. The order is like creating the object, providing the data by using setter injection, calling init method, and you can use the object in the middle. Destroy method will be called, finally object will be destroyed. Lot of people will think destroy method will destroy the object. No. Destroy method is something you want to do some task before destroying the object. Okay, something called cleanup process. So what are the different ways of writing lifecycle methods in Spring? We can write by using XML. It is also called as declarative approach. By writing bean tag. At bean tag level, we can pass init-method. That method name we need to pass, whatever the method name you take, and same destroy-method. Using Spring interfaces, it is also called as programmatic approach. There are two interfaces given, initializing bean and disposable bean. We have to implement this interface and override the methods. We can also use annotations, that is post construct and pre-destroy. These are three ways we can implement lifecycle methods. And remember, these methods are optional. Question number 21. What are the common implementations of application context? Here, remember, application context means Spring container. It's an interface. The first implementation, file system XML application context. You can have this XML file wherever in the project or outside of the project in your system, like D drive, E drive, wherever it is, it can be loaded. Okay, we need to mention the full path of XML file, like c:/myfiles:/. Okay, so file name.xml. Second, class path XML application context. It is also one class. Class path means generally it should be inside the project. In simple, SRC means resource folder. In simple words, your XML file must present inside the project in the class path. Okay, our class path location that you set in the OS, that is also fine. Web XML application context. This one generally used to implement web-based applications when you're using web.xml configuration files like servlets and all here. Even there are so many other implementations like annotation config application context, configurable application context, and so on. Question 22. What are the stereotype annotations? There are mainly 5 stereotype annotations we have. First, understand the meaning of stereotype. If you use these annotations on top of your class, then container will create object to your classes. That's actually called stereotype. They are component, service, repository, controller, and rest controller. Component is a generic one you can add on top of any class which creates object. Service generally to implement the business logics. Repository to implement the database operations. Controller to implement HTTP based web based applications. REST controller, web services concept it is used. Question number 23. What are the different modules in Spring? Remember, Spring is a collection of so many modules in a well organized way. Those can be given as some groups: core module, database module, web module, aspect oriented programming, instrumentation, and test modules. You can see a small diagram is given: core container, AOP, instrumentation, data access, web, and test. So this, by using these modules only, we are going to implement the application. And every module has internal chapters or concepts. You can just observe there. What is profiles in Spring? We'll be having so many environments in real time, like development, staging, testing, UAT, production. We'll be having so many environments. If we move our application one environment to another environment, our properties will be modified. Okay, like we'll be having database connections, mailing properties, and all. Those, instead of modifying every time, we can activate by mentioning a profile, by using a key, by passing at runtime 2 dashes, spring.profile.active equal to QA. Of course, you can use even VM argument -D also. We can maintain multiple properties files, something called application-qa.properties, application.properties, application-prod.properties. And even we can use @profile annotation also to execute some code based on the active profile. Question 25. What is inner bean in Spring? The name indicates defining one bean inside another bean. It's not reusable, but it's fast in the execution. Okay, so we'll write a bean tag, property tag, and inside that again a bean tag. Or else we can write a constructor and inside the bean tag. We can implement this by using setter injection, property tag, constructor injection by using constructor arg tag. You can see a sample code. First, we create the object for outer bean, then property. In the place of property tag, you can use constructor arg also. Then again a bean tag, that is inner class bean. Then we can define the configurations and closing the tags. This is actually inner bean representation. The benefit of inner bean is actually it's a fast in execution. When the parent is loaded, child also loaded. When the parent is unloaded from memory, child also unloaded. What is a Spring Web module? This is actually module given by Spring Framework, like other modules like Spring Core, Spring Data, and all. If you want to implement MVC based applications, web applications, or RESTful applications, web service applications, we are going to use this module. This module completely implemented using HTTP protocol standard. like get, post, put, delete operations, response status codes and all. It's internally using. By using this web module, we are going to implement applications like client server application, like browser to server concept, or a server to server application. That means web services like Book My Show interacting with Google Pay, like Paytm, one application to another application. Second one, what is MVC? MVC is actually a software design pattern. It's an architectural design pattern. MVC stands for model, view, and controller. It is actually separating of three things. That is actually separating of model, separating of view logic, and separating of controller, and develop the application in parallel. What is Spring MVC? Question number 3. You see, Spring MVC is actually given by a Java framework. It is used to implement dynamic web applications that follows model, view, and controller. Model indicates data. It can be a single object or a collection of objects. It is actually shared between view and controller. Controller means simply it's a code, it's a class that actually contains business logic on application. We can also call it request processing code also. View is a final representation that is given to end customers or client machines. Here, view is actually Java-based view again. It's a JSP with JSTL or Apache, Velocity, Themely, FreeMarker, and so on. Question 4. What is a front controller in Spring MVC? Each and every request is taken by a predefined servlet in Spring MVC that is called dispatcher servlet. This is a predefined class, exists in the package org.springframework.web.servlet package. This one we need not to define, but it actually takes care of all the requests and it will redirect it to an appropriate controller. As a programmer, we need to configure this dispatcher servlet in web.xml file by writing servlet tag, servlet mapping tag, and all. So what is the flow of Spring MVC? Every request that is actually made by client will be taken care by dispatcher servlet as a front controller. This one takes help of handler mapping to identify an exact controller and its method from the XML configuration. Once controller is executed, it returns some output along with the view details that is called model and view. Finally, with the help of view resolver, it gets the view data and reads into model representation. A final UI is created and rendered into HTML format given back to client. Question number 6. What are the advantages of Spring MVC framework? There are a lot to discuss, but mainly it is actually lightweight. Compared to any other MVC frameworks, here we have a single servlet mechanism and that comes without any UI representation. You can add dynamically. So it's a lightweight. Only single servlet, all are simple classes. Rapid application development. You have to concentrate on controllers and UIs only. So if UI is changed also, it is not going to give much effect. You can implement them in parallel. Flexible mapping. We have a lot of annotations and easy to configure and easy to redirect. Okay, we can use get mapping, post mapping, such annotations, request bad annotations. So we can implement this application in a very simple manner. Question 7. Which annotations are used for HTTP request methods? Generally, if a request coming from any client, that is HTTP request, we have to map with different types of methods, like get mapping, post mapping, put mapping, patch mapping, delete mapping. Get mapping is actually representing of fetching the data from server to client. Post mapping indicates creating a new resource at server. Put mapping indicates modifying the existed data at server. Patch indicates partially modifying the data at server. Delete mapping indicates removing the data at server. If you are working with Web MVC, we use get and post. If you are working with Web REST, get, post, put, patch, delete, all are used. What is the major difference between @controller and REST controller? It's one of the most asked questions. @controller and REST controllers, there's actually major differences @response body. @controller plus response body is equal to @REST controller. So here, @response body, we need not to handle manually in case of @REST controller concept. Of course, you can even use @controller and you can convert that body into manually. But here @controller generally returns a view resolver based output. Finally, response will be there. Okay, but that is actually going to be HTML representation mostly. So what are the request body and response body annotations and why these are actually used? If you're working with a Spring REST-based application, mostly these two are used. If an incoming request is actually contains JSON data or XML data, you want to convert that into an object format, then @request body is used. That is actually called deserializing the data, converting JSON or XML to object format. It internally uses HTTP message converter. @response body works on our method return type. Request body works on parameter. Response body works on return. How to map controller class and its methods with a URL. Okay, I just want to connect a URL and HTTP method to controller code. How it can be done? We can use @request mapping annotation as a base annotation at class level and method level. Remember, other HTTP method annotations are there: get, post, put, delete. Those you can apply only at method. But here, I want to map the URL at controller and method level. So we can use @request mapping. So we have to specify the URL and the method types, all the details. So you can see some example I'm just mentioning: @request mapping on a class level, @request mapping on a method level we can use. So what is the purpose of @path variable annotation in Spring MVC? Generally, if you want to extract the data of an incoming request URI that is sent by using /symbol representation, and you want to read that by using method handler parameters. So you can see a small example: request mapping. There we are mentioning in the curly braces ID. That curly brace indicates a value comes at runtime, /show /10 /low /200, like that. A value comes here. But we have to read that same name by using @path variable to the handler method, means controller method parameter. We have to mention the data type and the local variable name continuous to the path variable annotation. What is the role of response body annotation in Spring MVC? Generally, MVC applications returns HTTP format, but you want to represent a JSON output or as XML output, then we can add @response body on top of your methods. You can see a small example. So just mention the response body. So here the return type is product to payload. Display method return type is product to payload. Product payload assumption, it's a class. Okay, a simple POJO class having variables like ID, code, and amount. This is converted into a JSON representation. Once a display method is executed, it gives JSON out. What do you understand by validations in Spring MVC? If an end user makes a request, that request contains some inputs. That inputs I want to validate or I want to restrict, then we can use a validation annotation concept. If you want to use this validation concept, your Spring version must be 4 or higher, and you must add bean validation API dependency in the pom.xml or build.gradle file. And some validations are @not null, that will not accept null values. @pattern. You can mention something like name should have 4 characters, 4 are uppercase letters. @email. @past is generally used for date concept. We can use future and past. @not blank, not null, and empty space also not allowed. We have to use @valid annotation along with @request body or model attribute. @valid with request body or @valid with model attribute. Which annotations are used to define global exception handler class? Here we use controller advice or REST controller advice along with exception handler. Generally we can use try-catch block, but in case of repeated try-catch blocks are there, I want to define for common all this exception on some place, so that I will be having a generic exception handling code we can use. If you're using Web MVC, @controller advice. If you're using Web REST, @REST controller advice. We need to define one class and annotate with controller advice or REST controller advice. Then we need to define one method, and on top of that, we have to mention @exception handler. In parameter, we can mention exception type like user not found exception, insufficient balance exception, parameter type exception, like you can mention exception types. Explain some response status codes. This is also mostly asked question in real time. 200 indicates okay, that's actually success. 400 bad request, your input data is invalid. 401, it's unauthorized. Login request failed. 403, it's a forbidden. You logged in successfully, but you have no access to resources. 404, URL not found or URL not exist. 405, method not allowed. You made a GET request, but program is post. 500, internal server error or exception at application side. These are the few response status code mostly used in real time. What is cross-origin concept in Spring Web? Generally, cross is actually a security mechanism that is also called a CORS, cross-origin resource sharing. If a request is coming from web browsers by using a JavaScript applications, if it wants to produce or consume, we are going to be saying, okay, it's not allowed by default. If you are working with integration like Angular application, React.js application, or any node-based applications that runs in the browser, then in Spring Web Application side, we have to add one annotation @cross origin by mentioning the URL. Here URL I give sample 8080, it can be 4200, 9000, 3000. That depends on the application that you are running on the port, that front-end applications we used to call. If you mention this, then the request is actually allowed, else it is not. It says CORS is blocked. Mostly you see this kind of exceptions if you're integrating with Angular or React.js. What is init binder in Spring Web? Request is dispatched to the controller. Before controller, I want to do some pre-processing or converting some logics for each request, then init binder is used. This actually web data init binder is also called. Generally, if a client application is sending the date that comes in a text representation or string, I want to convert it to a date class, then we can do using init binder. Even you are getting a string and I want to convert to some user type of class by taking some 2-3 parameters, then also we can use it. Simply we can call pre-processing logic, converting some formats of the code. So what is the difference between path variable and request param annotations, or explain them? It is also mostly asked question. Lot of people says path variable and request param, in that path variable works only in the REST, request param works in web. No, it's actually not like that. Both can be used in Web, MVC and REST. But the difference is sending the data. If you're sending the data by using @path variable, then data can be sent along with the request URL by using slash symbol and directly data that follows the order. You can see a small example, /hello, /100 and /Raghu. So value 100 is actually bound to ID, and /Raghu is the name that is bound to the variable name. There is no key value, order must be followed. Coming to request param, it's actually called query string, starts from question mark symbol. Okay, key is equal to value. You can send in any order, and that's actually read by using @request param. So in a simple point, request param extracts the data from query string, where path variable extracts the data from URI path. Why do we need view resolver in Spring MVC? View resolver, if you are using, that's actually purpose is to provide the final output, rendering the model to web browser. So in simple, creates a dynamic HTML files we used to call. Internal resource view resolver is the mostly used view resolver in Web MVC. We have even some other view resolvers like abstract caching view resolver, XML view resolver, URL based view resolver, and so on. So view resolver is finally responsible to provide the output that will be displayed in the browser. What is the use of @model attribute annotation? Question number 20. If you want to bind the data that is actually coming from the client and you want to bind to a method parameter, of course you can return type also, so that it can be used as a model attribute. Consider we are using one HTML form like registration form, inquiry form, login form, payment form, that I want to convert it to an object. So like employee object you want to convert, then you can use model attribute and you can read that object into your method parameter. The simple syntax looks like model attribute. You have to mention the object name, then followed by the class name and local variable name. Is @controller and REST controller stereotypes? Answer is yes. Both REST controller and control annotations are stereotypes. @controller is a subtype of component or specialization of a component. Component is a parent, controller is a child, you can call. Where REST controller is a subtype of controller. Hierarchy comes like @component, @controller, @REST controller. @REST controller internally contains response body, but not only that, it even indicates, hey, it's a RESTful application even. A lot of people says, why can't we use @controller with response body? Yes, you can use and you can get the output, but the standard is given @REST controller, you have to use that if you are implementing RESTful web services and request processing. What is the major difference between Spring Core and Spring MVC? Lot of people will ask this kind of question to confuse the people. Actually, Spring Core is a basic concept that is to handle the object mechanisms and all, where Spring MVC built on top of Spring Core. Spring Core is actually called as IOC container, dependency injections by using bean class concepts, handling of objects and all, where MVC internally uses IOC mechanism and works for web application implementations. Spring Core concepts, of course, there is a container system, beans, scheduling, AOP. These are all part of Spring Core. What are the ways of reading data from form in Spring MVC. If a request form is submitted, you can use a legacy technique, HTTP servlet request as a method parameter, and you can use request.get parameter. But the defaults always return string representation. You have to do manual conversion. We can use @request param annotation. That is also used to read the data. It even supports type conversion. We can use @model attribute to read entire form into an object. All are method parameters only here. What is @response entity representation or response entity of generic type in Spring REST? If you are using REST controllers, the final output is response entity. It is actually used for return type in the REST controllers. Generally, response entity contains body, that is called response body, response HTTP headers, and response status code. If you are returning a class type non-string representation like employee, list of details, that will be converted into XML or JSON formats, global formats, by using @response body converter. Question number 25. Why @request header is used in Spring Web? If a request is made that actually contains header and body section, header contains header parameters in the form of key and value, which are sent by client. I want to read only header parameters like authorization header, content type header, request format header, even some custom headers. I can pass my own key and values. Then we can use @request header annotation. Example, you can see request header, mention the key name, data type, and local variable. First question, what is ORM? ORM stands for Object Relational Mapping. The meaning here, it says we have to perform every operation in object-oriented manner. This ORM we can also call a technique that is actually connects our application, a Java application, so that is object-oriented programming will be connected to a relational database. So here it can be Oracle database or MySQL database, that is relational database we are going to use. So the ORM concept mainly used for database operations here. Every operation that you perform, either save, insert, update, delete, select, any operation that you perform, that should be in object. Save the object, update the object, delete the object, select the object. That's actually ORM concept. Question 2. What is JPA? JPA stands for Java Persistency API. This is actually one of the ORM specification. We can call simply ORM is a theoretical concept, where JPA is a programmatical concept, but it's not the complete one. Sun Microsystem is given some set of interfaces and classes by mentioning, yes, it is following ORM. This is actually we used to call a Java specification to do persistency operation, means database connectivity operations here. And this is mainly for relational databases between Java objects and applications. Okay, it actually connects a Java class with the database tables here. Question number 3. What is mapping concept in JPA? Explain mapping rule in JPA. We have to follow a concept of mapping a class with a table. One Java class will be connected to one table. Such class is actually called entity, a class that is mapped with database table here. So here inside the class will be having variables. One variable should be connected to one column. For example, we have 4 variables. We need to define 4 columns in the table. Then if we do that, one object is converted into one row. Even one row will be converted to one object by JPA. Question number 4. What is the difference between JPA and Hibernate? This is one of the mostly asked question you see. First point you should understand, ORM is a theory. JPA is a coding or a specification given by Sun Microsystem. Of course, now part of Oracle. They said you follow some set of interfaces and annotations so that you will achieve the programming of JPA that follows ORM. But by using JPA, we can't write the complete application. We have to use one vendor or implementer, that is actually Hibernate. Hibernate is a JPA implementation. You can also call it vendor. There is no mistake in that. Other implementations also available, but Hibernate is very famous one and mostly used by large applications. Even Spring Boot internally using same Hibernate. You can see Eclipse, Apache Open JPA, iBetis, TopLink. These are few examples. What are some advantages of using JPA? If you use JPA compared to JDBC, mainly we can say it's a database independent. If you are working with Oracle database and you are moving to MySQL database, JPA code works as usual. But here, there is a major concept called dialect that we need to change, and easy to develop database operations. If you are performing insert, update, delete, you need not write any queries. Queries are generated. You can even define your own queries. Generally, we write SQL query, structured query language, right? But here we use a standard query concept that is called JPQL HQL. JPQL is a specification, again HQL is implementation. Java persistency query language, Hibernate query language, that is called. And we can be independent of database data type. Generally databases follows different data types and parameter mechanism. Okay, for example, if you are using MySQL, you may see int data type, double data type, varchar data type. If you go for Oracle, you see number data type, varchar 2 types. But here we don't bother about the database data types. It's auto mapping or implicit mapping. Question number 6. What is Spring Data or Spring Boot Data JPA repositories? Actually, we are going to work. Generally, if you use only JPA with Hibernate, we write code manually, even for save and update. But Spring Boot Data JPA says, hey programmer, we are giving some set of interfaces. Those are CRUD repository, paging and sorting repository, JPA repository. These are all predefined interfaces. These are actually given by Spring Boot, and it's saying you don't even write the class, you just extend the interface and create one more interface. I'll generate one class that will perform the operations at runtime. Okay, here only you define the interface by extending one of the above interfaces. And the mostly used is JPA repository. Question number 7. What is the difference between paging and sorting repository and JPA repository? It is also one of the mostly asked questions. A lot of people say the difference is actually both are similar, but the major point, JPA repository is designed only for relational database. Means if you are using MySQL database, Oracle database, such database, of course you can work. Postgres database even. But paging and sorting repository, CRUD repository works for both SQL and NoSQL database. If you are having MongoDB, Cassandra, okay, there paging and sorting concept is used. Of course, even paging and sorting specially designed for sorting of programming pagination purpose, but those are also available in JPA repository because JPA internal extend paging and sorting. This is only major difference you can identify. What are the predefined methods given by repository interfaces? This is even asked mostly. You see some set of methods I'm giving. Save. This method behaves like either insert or delete to remove the data. Find by ID to fetch one row data as an object based on the primary key. Find all to fetch all the DB records. Delete by ID to delete one record based on the primary key. Count to know how many number of records present in the database table. Exist by ID, whether the given ID exists or not. It returns Boolean. Find all with a sorting concept. Find all with a pageable. These are few methods I gave. Even there are a lot. What is entity class? And explain commonly used annotation for this. This is even common for JPA and data JPA. A class that is mapped with a database table. One class, one table. Simple mechanism. That is called entity class. We can also call it as a POJO class, plain old Java object. There is no mistake of calling. It must be mapped with database table using JPA annotations. Such annotations will be @entity, table, ID, column, generated value. There are so many annotations. But here, entity and ID are must. Entity will map our class with a table. @ID indicates primary. Table and columns are optional actually. Question number 10. What is the naming convention for finder methods in the Spring Data repository interface? Okay, here we can also call finder methods or find by methods even. We can define even our custom methods by using finder mechanism or find by mechanism. That follows by variable names in the Java class. We have to take as it is entity variable name. The syntax looks like return type, find by, F lowercase, only B uppercase you see. Variable name and keywords. Then you have to pass the parameters. That includes data type here. Example, you can see find by last name. This is going to generate a query internally. Actually, we need not write any SQL, HQL, JPQL queries here. Just write find by. It will internally generates a query. This is simply to construct a where condition SQL select operation. How can we create a custom repository in Spring Data JPA? Or simply they are going to ask, how can we create a specific repository for an entity class, or creating user repository, product repository, employee repository? Question may be asked in different ways here. Answer is very simple. You use one of the below interfaces. You write one interface again. So create a child interface by extending repository interface, CRUD repository, paging and sorting repository, and JP repository. A lot of people says, what is the use of just extending repository interface as it is empty? No, you don't want to use any select or delete operations which are given by Spring Data JPA. You want to define your custom query methods, then you can go for first one, repository interface. Question 12. What is paging and sorting repository? This is the repository given by Spring Data JPA. They are saying it's actually for two purposes. One is actually sorting. You want to select the data and you want to sort the data while selecting ascending or descending order. That's a one purpose. There is a method actually find by, that's actually find all method, which takes sort parameter. And second, if you want to fetch the data page by page, that's called pagination. By fetching the data, printing, or you can convert the data. So that is actually page by page, you can get it. That is called pagination. There is a find all method, which takes pageable input, page out. This repository internally extends even CRUD repository. So what are the methods available in the CRUD repository? All are available in paging and sorting repository also. What is @query used for? If you want to define your own query, which is actually not present in the repositories, I want to fetch 3 columns based on 2 conditions, then we can define @query annotation is used to define our own query, or custom query we can also call. But if you are writing this query, make sure you should not write SQL query. You should write JPQL HQL query. How come it is different? SQL query is constructed using table names and column names. JPQL HQL constructed using class name in the place of table name, variable name in the place of column name. That's a major change. And it's even case sensitive. Here JPQL is actually specified. Of course, it's a specification we used to call. HQL is the implementation. That is only we need to pass to @query. So what are the types of queries we can write by using @query annotations? By using @query annotations, we can define both select and non-select operations. That is called update and delete, but not insert. Remember it, but not insert. We have to use @query. We can write even JPQL, HQL queries, and native SQL, means pure SQL queries also we can write. Database dependent queries also. But remember, are you using @query with update or delete? You should also add @modifying annotation, because @query by default indicates select. You want to indicate non-select, just writing a query is not sufficient. You have to add @modifying annotation also. Can we give example of using @query annotation with JPQL? Of course, we can see by taking employee entity. I'm just mentioning one example here. We have tried select E from employee E, where E dot name is equals to $1. Here you can see E, there's actually alias, and $1 indicates one input. One value comes at runtime, that is called one parameter. You can write $1, $2, $3, like that we can write so on. This must be defined on top of abstract method. See, I wrote one abstract method. This time method name can be any name. And parameters, I have passed one parameter because $1 is there. Okay, if 2 question marks are there, we have to pass 2. That returns some out. And remember, @query, whatever exactly we're defining that one, it must be inside the repository interface and must be on top of abstract method. You can see get employee based on name is a method I wrote. That is at last semicolon is there. It's abstract method. And you must check JPQL HQL syntaxes. I did not use table name. Employee is a class name. Okay, E dot name is actually variable name. It's not a column name. The syntax and all we have to cross check. What are the collections mapping supported by JPA? It is also one of the mostly asked question. JPA supports list, set, and map. Of course, you can use collection interface also. If you are using this, remember we should add @element collection annotation over the variable. Whenever you use element collection, that is actually going to create a child table with a 2 to 3 columns. Those 3 columns will be key column, means foreign key column. Index column, index means 0, 1, 2, 3 positions will be there in case of list. In case of map indexes, map keys will be positions. Element column, the actual data of the collection will be stored. So why I mentioned 2/3 here? If you're using a set collection, set will never follow index mechanism. So if you're using a set collection, a child table is created with 2 columns only. They are key and element column, no index column. For list and map collections, a table is created with 3 columns: key column, index column and element column. What is platform transaction manager? It's actually an interface that internally extends transaction manager. Transaction manager is to handle transactions. So this actually interface given by Spring transaction infrastructure here. Internally, there is an annotation used @transactional. Okay, this annotation is actually going to do commit or else rollback based on the operation. If a query is successfully executed without any issue, then commit it is going to do. If a query is failed, exception occurred, it is actually going to do rollback. So that annotation is taken care by this platform transaction manager. So how can we enable Spring Data JPA? You want to use Spring Data JPA? Don't worry, it is actually auto configured. You need not to do any specific configurations and enabling. Just add a dependency, a starter. Springboot starter data JPA. This annotation, okay, if you want to use all the process here, this dependency we need to add. If you're using Gradle, in case of Gradle, you have to mention this one in the build.gradle. And along with this, we need to add some key values in the application.properties, like database connection, JPA details. I'm just giving a few examples here. You can see some keys. These are data source keys. Not only this, even JPA show and dialect. We can even mention few more. What is the difference between find by ID and get one? It is also one of the mostly asked question. Both are used to fetch one row data based on the primary key. But find by ID is actually exist in CRUD repository. Get one exists in JPA repository. Find by ID, if you are using, it will take the primary key or ID as an input. It will return optional object with a value will be null if record is not found. Get method will throw exception. It will never return null. That's a major difference. Find by ID returns null, that is called empty object of optional. Get method throws exception in case of record is not found. What is the use of dialect? Give some examples. Remember, dialect is a class that is actually defined in the JPA. All SQL queries are generated by dialect. You are writing save method, insert query generated. You are writing delete method, delete query generated by dialect itself. If you move from one database to another database, remember, dialect need to be modified. Example, I'm mentioning Oracle 10J dialect, MySQL 8 dialect, Postgres dialect, and so on. What is fetch type in JPA? This is also one of the most asked questions. Generally, you are performing select operations in association mappings or collections concept. Do you want to fetch parent data along with the child data, or you want to fetch only parent data from the tables? That is decided by fetch type. Eager, lazy. Eager means I want to load parent with its child. For example, I have a customer and customer orders. If I want to fetch customer and with orders at a time by using a single query, that is called eager loading. So lazy, it loads only parent data from the table. Later, if you call a specific child getter methods and all, those data will be loaded. Both are actually for select operation, where fetch type is actually enum even internally. So the next question you may get like this: what is the default fetch type? There is no default mechanism for fetch type. There is no default value given. That depends on the operation that you select. For example, you are writing one to many or many to many. Observe carefully, child is many. One to many, many to many. In this case, it's a lazy. And also, if you're using element collection annotation, that is also lazy. Eager, that means one to one, many to one. Child is one. You can observe. Then it's actually eager will be D. How can we see generated SQLs at the console or log file? You want to see SQL queries? By default, JPA will never display generated SQL. It will generate the query, but it will not display because there will be a property show underscore SQL. We need to make it as a true. Then we can see the full key will be spring.jpa.show hyphen SQL is equals to true. Of course, you can use underscore also. The default value is false and we need to make it as a true. What are the different types of joins supported by JPA? We can mention inner join, fetching data from two tables which are actually commonly connected. Inner join and join meaning is same. The word inner is optional. And we have outer joins. There are three types: left outer join, right outer join, and full outer join. Remember, left outer join or left join is same. The word outer is optional. Left outer join actually gets left side table all the rows and connected right side table data. Right outer join or right join gets all the rows from right side table and connected rows from left side table. Full outer join or full join, it will get both connected and non-connected rows from both the tables. So if you want to see the syntax of SQL and JPQL, HQL join syntax, SQL syntax you can see here. You have to mainly observe join type means inner join, left join, right join. You can mention on condition, on ON. Parent dot primary key is equals to child dot foreign key. It can be reverse. Parent dot foreign key is equal to child dot primary key. That depends on the type you choose. In case of JPQL HQL, look at the syntax. There will be no on clause is not available. Here we have to take a mapping variable. In case of customer class is having a order variable ORD. Okay, then it looks like from customer C inner join C dot ORD as O. Like that it is going. What is Spring Security? Spring Security is actually a separate module that is given in the Spring framework. This is mainly to handle authentication and authorization concept for the Java applications which are implemented using Spring framework. It even takes care of a lot of Spring security issues. We can also call vulnerabilities and also different types of attacks, CSRF, cross-site request forgery. We can implement this by using a simple annotation that is @enable web security. Second question, what are some essential features of Spring Security? Main feature is to handle authentication and authorization in a flexible manner in a required process for your application. Java Authentication and Authorization Service, JAS, is actually a module that is given by Sun Microsystems, of course, now part of Oracle. By using this, Spring Security is actually implemented. It allows single sign-on that is called SSO. In case of multiple applications we have, those we can access by using one-time login. You can take G Suite, Google Suite. If you log in using Google credentials, you can access Gmail, Google Drive, Google Docs, YouTube, all the things with a single sign-on, one-time authentication. What is Spring Security authentication and authorization concept? Authentication means it's actually verifying the current user identity who is want to access this application. Here, the restrictions are verified by using a simple username and password. It's like a login form is given. You want to access the website, then you have to enter the simple username and password. That is called authentication. Authorization indicates who can access what. This is also called a simple process of role. For example, an application, a user is logged in, but he will be having a role called admin, role called user, role called guest. So based on the role types, this is going to be decided who can access what. That role process handling is called authorization. Question number 4. What do you mean by basic authentication? Basic authentication, nothing but we have to send the username and password using HTTP authorization header. This is, we are going to use a concept of base 64 encoding. Remember, it's not encryption. It's an encoding concept. So this header parameter is actually going to be sent from the request, and it can be even decoded very easily. The syntax looks like, first, a value is constructed using username : password, and it is base 64 encoded the same value. Authorization header is actually added in the request header body. Okay, and basic encoded value we have to send. Okay, authorization header need to be specified. This is a basic authentication. Explain Spring Security context and security context holder. Spring Security context will hold current user details. It is a subtype of principal interface that is called authentication object. So who is the current user? What are his roles? Everything will be stored in the context. To retrieve the context, directly we can't access context object. To retrieve that, we are going to use security context holder by using a static call. Security context holder is also called as a helper class that is used to access the security context object. Question number 6. Explain Spring Security OAuth 2. OAuth 2 is actually a standard. It's also called open authorization. In this case, we are going to use a third-party authorization server. You might have seen something like Facebook login, Google login, GitHub login. We are going to use So our application is called client application that is going to get the access from authorization server on behalf of resource owner or the user who is actually trying to log. Here, there are different words or terminologies we have. Resource owner, nothing but an end user. Client, nothing but application that you are trying to access. Authorization and resource server, nothing but actually the one which is providing what security mechanism, like a Facebook, Google, and GitHub applications. Question number 7. What is method security and why do we need? Here, the major concept is role. That role will decide who can access what. That is called authorizing. A security measurement is applied even to prevent unauthorized users. It even says who cannot access this event and who can access this event. For example, admin can access all the employees. Employee can access his project and profile. Employee cannot access admin credentials. Like we are going to mention everything for a specific method here. So we are preventing that is unauthorized access even by using the specific rules. Okay, such concept is actually implemented at method level security. This one internally uses aspect-oriented programming. Question number 8. What do you mean by hashing in Spring Security? Generally, end user is actually going to register his details. At the same time, he will provide password. That password we store in the database as it is. That is called plain text. Storing the plain text in the database is not a recommended standard. So it should be converted to unreadable format. That is called encrypting the password and storing by using a mechanism called hashing. To convert this into unreadable format, there are so many hashing algorithms available, message digester algorithms and security hashing algorithms, that is called SHA algorithms. Okay, these algorithms are used to convert the password into unreadable format. Question number 9. What is password encoder? Password encoder is actually an interface. This is given by Spring Security. It has two simple methods. One is encode. At the time of registering the user, they will give plain text as a password that is converted to encode method. That is encode method will convert into unreadable format and will store in the database. Matches method is used at the time of login. Remember, encode is actually used at the time of register. Matches is used in case of login. If end user gives his password, that is actually encoded and compared with the database password. If both are matching, it says yes, it is true, the user is valid. Question number 10. Name some security annotations that are allowed to use in Spring expression language. There are so many annotations like pre-authorized, pre-filter, post-authorized, and post-filter. Okay, these are all you can access based on the expressions spell concept. We can also call it expression-based access control, EBAC. Pre-authorized annotation is the mostly used annotations, generally for method level securities. There is a legacy annotation, old annotation, secured annotation. Okay, generally we can't use in case of this new spell concept. So if you want to check the role admin, role user, you can go for an annotation that is pre-authorized in case of secured. Remember, legacy applications you see secured annotations, latest applications you can see pre-authorized. What is authentication manager in Spring Security? Authentication manager says in simple how the authentication process will happen. This authentication manager contains the reference to all the authentication providers. This one will be having a method that is authenticate, that is actually going to give one of the action. The first one, if it is true, if it is a valid, it's actually going to indicate authentication as a true. In case of invalid, it will throw authentication exception. If unable to find a valid input or null inputs, it returns null. It's going to return these actions based on the types that is internally used by authenticate method. What are some predefined filters used by Spring Security? There is a proper and a standard filter chain given in a complex manner by Spring Security, and we can use in a flexible order. One, security context persistence filter. Generally, it will get the security context object by validating the current user session ID from the current request cookie. Username password authentication filter. Generally, it is executed in case of login form submitted. It will take the username, it will take the password, verifies with the database by taking request.get parameter mechanism to read the form data. There are even some other filters available in Spring Security. These two are major. When you add a custom filter in Spring Security in security filter chain, obviously we can add. If you want to implement your own logic, then you can add or you can replace the existing filters. But if you want to implement a new functionality depending on your requirement, yes, you can create a new filter and you can add in the chain also. We have one interface representation filter, and continuation we have a lot of classes we can use. In that, we have a filter type once per request filter. You can implement this and you can override configurations. And at last, you have to register this with the security configurations. How to implement a custom filter in Spring Security? We can use generic filter bean class. This we can use and we can implement our custom filter. This generic filter bean is having a method that is do filter that takes servlet request, servlet response, and filter chain. Filter chain is actually used to call the next filter or our dispatcher servlet in the execution order. What does @ symbol and hash symbol is used in Spring expression language? @ symbol generally used to refer a Spring bean from the Spring container, and symbol hash is used to refer a parameter for a method that you are using. Example, I'm just showing authorization.name. That's actually authorization object as a parameter we are taking that is used to print the current user. This authorization is a subtype of principal interface. Question number 16. What do you mean by session management in Spring Security? Session means, remember, at the time of login, user will enter username and password. If they're actually valid, one HTTP session is created at server side. That session creation, managing, destroying, everything is called session management. To control these HTTP sessions, session management filter and session authentication strategies are used. Generally, filter will check JSession ID, and if it's a valid, we are going to continue. Authentication strategy will take care of session timeout, session IDs checking. Okay, session strategy is actually going to verify is that object null or exist or not. One of the mostly asked question nowadays, question number 17. Explain salting and its usage. This concept is actually applied in Spring version 3.1, that is Spring Security version we can call. Salting means we are going to have a random number added to our password. Random number is actually generated, added to the password, then it is converted to encoded format or encrypted format. That is using password hashing. This salting concept is to improve the uniqueness of the password and also complexity. Easily it cannot be decoded. At the time of hashing the password while storing in the database, even salt also stores. Its servlet filter intercepts all the incoming requests sent to an application. Here we have a predefined filter delegating filter process. This is actually going to stay between our application container and end customer request. Every request will bypass through this filter. The servlet container, it allows to register the filter using its own standard, or else we can even register by using servlet container mechanism. Okay, by using web.xml. Okay, we can define a filter tag and we can write even. Question number 19. To secure which layer @enable global method security annotation is generally to secure the service layers. This annotation is used by using the specification request annotation @secured. This is a bit legacy annotation. You can see mostly in the old up type of applications. From the new version onwards, you can go for expression-based annotations, that is spell-based annotation. Question number 20. How to implement Spring Boot plus basic authentication? I want to implement basic authentication. You need to create Spring Boot application with a dependency Spring Boot starter security, or you can add it manually in pom.xml. Then in application.yml, you need to mention a default username and default password. You can define a security configuration class, that is web security conf adapter, and define some the first one. What is microservice architecture? This architecture is actually used to develop the complex applications, and we can also call it high scale applications, converting a big application into small services and which can be developed and deployed independently. This supports even those small services can communicate with each other using APIs. It is a modular and decoupled architecture. Question 2. What are the benefits of using microservice architecture? We have multiple benefits. First one, scalability. You can also call it horizontal scaling and vertical scaling, scale up, scale down, or scale in, scale out. Resilience, reducing the cascading failure. Flexibility and faster development cycles. Easy to maintain because of this are independent and modularized. Explain solid principles. One of the mostly asked question. Solid actually full form. S stands for single responsibility principle. Here we have to define one class or one REST controller that is going to handle only one type of operation. All employee operations, one REST controller. All product operations, one REST controller. Like we have to define individual classes. Those will perform their specific operations to that module. Open closed principles. Here we have to define the software entities, means our classes. We can extend them by creating a subclasses but we should not allow them to modify. Lisco substitution principle, it says if you have superclass and subclass, superclass reference can also hold subclass object. This is a default nature in Java even. Okay, but here whenever you have a method parameter of super type, we should able to pass subclass object. That should not break the behavior of the application. Interface segregation principle, don't write one interface that contains all the requirements. You divide into multiple interfaces, define 4 or 5 interface, no issue. Okay, so that can specify what are the requirements you have, those interface only use. Dependency inversion principle, okay, it says if you are using dependency mechanism, so don't use dependency type as classes, use interfaces, and so that you can inject implementation classes. Generally in the layers design, we follow POJO pattern, service interface and service implementation, or DAO interface and DAO implementation. That comes under dependency inversion principle. What is Spring Cloud and what are its key features? We have seen microservice actually designed to implement that Spring Cloud is used. This is built on top of Spring Boot. It is actually used for developing and deploying of microservices. The key features are nothing but service discovery and registration, load balancing, circuit breaking, distributed configuration, API gateway, and distributed trace. Question 5. What is service discovery and how it achieved actually in Spring Cloud? A discovery nothing but actually we are going to maintain all the services information so that they can communicate with each other at runtime dynamically. So Spring Cloud is actually provides a service discovery concept that is Netflix Eureka, or we can also go for Consul. Eureka is the mostly used one even. So this one will store all the microservice informations, where they are running, how many times they are running. Okay, so if they want to communicate with each other, it will provide details. So register, it allows discover the services, of course even enables the communication between microservices. Question number 6, explain the role of API gateways in microservices. There should be one entry, one exit concept for all our microservices whenever client made request. It handles dynamic routing and load balancing. When a request is made by client, it has to choose one instance that has less load factor and execute that microservice, get the response and give it back to client application. The new API gateway name is Gateway, and the old one is actually Joule. These are libraries used to implement API gateway mechanism. This supports even integrating with service discovery like Eureka, or it supports even authentication mechanism like asking username and password or secure token. What is circuit breaking and how it is implemented using Spring Cloud? Circuit breaking is used to avoid cascading failures in microservice. For example, microservice 1 is connected to microservice 2 and that is connected to microservice 3 and so on. Suddenly, if microservice 2 is failed, 3, 4, 5 execution may get failed. So we should avoid executing of all those microservices from the failure point onwards. That is called circuit breaking. Breaking the execution flow in case of failure. Circuit breaking can be implemented using Netflix Hystrix or Resilience4j. Hystrix is an old library. Resilience4j is a new library. By using this, we can even monitor the health and we can specify how many times failure occurred. There is a concept called circuit open and circuit closed. Okay, if it is closed, allow execution of microservices. Open means don't allow. So the final meaning of circuit breaking is actually maintain the stable system. Okay, instead of making all exceptions and issues, just keep it in a stable form. What is load balancing and how it is handled in microservices? If we have a service that is running at multiple times, if a client made request multiple times, that should be distributed to all the services equally. That is actually distribution of client request. Spring Cloud actually supports load balancing concept like Netflix Ribbon or load balancer. Ribbon is the legacy one. Okay, cloud load balancer is a later. We can also call this is actually client-side load balancer. Here client means another microservice which is making request. So we can handle the distribution of load. Okay, we need not to do any manual configuration here. This auto configure. Question number 9. What are the tools used to aggregate microservice log file? There will be multiple microservices which are running at multiple locations. We can use ELK stack, one of the famous combination. Here, ELK stands for Elasticsearch, Logstash, and Kibana. Logstash is actually responsible for collecting and parsing the log. Elasticsearch is actually for storing and indexing the log. Kibana is actually UI, an interface. There you can search some by using some query patterns. What are the logs are actually there, errors, messages, all types. And we have even Splunk, that is also for searching, monitoring, analyzing. Okay. And even FluentD, There is also open source that aggregates logs from the different locations. ELK is the most used combination in case of Spring Cloud. What is distributed tracing and how it is implemented in Spring Cloud? If multiple microservices are executed for a request, I just want to know what is the path that they are executed and how many they are executed. It's a technique to track and monitor the request flow through multiple microservices. It's actually implemented using tracking systems like Zipkin server and Zipkin client. Sleuth is actually one which collects all the microservice execution paths and send it to Zipkin server with the help of Zipkin client. So if multiple microservices are executed for a request, how they are executed, in the what order, how much time taken, I want to find it for that distributed tracing. Is what is the purpose of Spring Cloud config and how it works? It's actually centralizing of configuration properties for microservices. Okay, if we have a common property for all multiple services, then you can use this Spring Cloud config mechanism. This even supports version controlling for the configuration process. Okay, even they can retrieve, manage at runtime. That is called dynamic and centralized configuration we can provide. What are the different types of cloud config? I want to configure this. How can we do? We can use a local file system, a properties file, or YAML file. This is generally used for testing purpose. That means Git vendors like GitHub, GitLab, Bitbucket you can use. This is one of the mostly used concepts for version controlling and managing of the configurations. We can use HashiCorp Vault. This is generally for securing the properties like password, tokens, access keys, okay, where we can access them by using authentication and authorization mechanism. Question number 13. What are the different approaches for intra-service communication in microservice? One of the most asked question. If one microservice wants to communicate with another microservice, then we are going for an intra-service concept. Okay, we can use HTTP REST APIs. Okay, that is REST templates, web clients we can use. Asynchronous message also can be done by using RabbitMQ or Kafka. We can do event-driven communication by using PubSub concepts or event bus. What is service orchestration and service choreography in microservices? This question is related to Sega pattern. This is mainly for distributed transaction management. Service orchestration is a pattern. It says everything is controlled by one component. There is a centralized approach. Orchestrator will be there. It says everything, all microservice followed. Okay, so it actually coordinates and says how the microservice paths and execution flow should be controlled. Choreography says no concentrating of centralized approach. Directly, every microservice that will be collaborated with other microservices without any central controller based on the patterns and designs required. Orchestrator maintains everything a single controller, where choreography says, okay, we can implement in a flexible and individual manner. What is the role of containers and container orchestration platforms? This is also one of the most asked question. Here, container nothing but actually we are actually packing our microservice with all dependencies. These are actually lightweight and portable environment. Here, environment means you can run your application wherever you want. You can Linux machine, Mac machine, Windows machine, on-premises, cloud environment. Easy to run the application mainly. This is actually consistent across different environments. Orchestrator platforms are there, Kubernetes or Docker Swarm. Okay, mostly Kubernetes is used. That is to automate and manage the containers at scaling. This is to deploy, scale, discover, load balance, fault tolerance in distributed environment, mainly well suitable for microservice architecture. Question number 16. Explain the concept of event-driven architecture and how Spring Cloud supports it. Event-driven architecture is actually to connect microservice communication in asynchronous manner. Okay, for that we can use a concept of message queues, RabbitMQ or Kafka in asynchronous programming, or we can use a Spring Cloud Stream, a Spring Cloud Bus concept to implement this event-driven patterns. We can also use a mechanism of publish and subscribe to the events, okay, that supports loose coupling and scalability of the system. Question number 7. What are the challenges consideration for testing a microservice? First and complication issues maintaining test data. If you want to test a microservice, lot of test data and setup is required. Orchestrating test environments and ensuring the proper isolation, handling the dependency, creating the test environment and running them and keeping them independent is a complicated task. Designing effective end-to-end test cases, selecting appropriate testing frameworks, even covering the test cases with a distributed mechanism. Okay, there is a rule, minimum 80% should be covered. Some organizations will make 90, some organizations make 75% of test coverages. These are very complicated and challenges tasks to do testing. How can we handle authentication in microservice application? Spring Cloud provides different types of mechanisms to handle the security. There are concepts like Spring Security, OAuth 2, that is called Open Authorization, JSON Web Tokens, JWT. Like OAuth 2, you can even implement your own resource providers, or else you can use login with a Facebook, login with a GitHub, login with a Google. By using this, we can implement authentication and authorization concept mainly to secure your REST endpoints. Who can access what? That is actually defining the role throughout multiple microservices applications here we have. What is the role of centralized logging microservice and how it can be achieved? Okay, centralized logging, we can be handled in different services. We can gather the logs for troubleshooting and monitoring the purpose here. Okay, so we can use ELK even for distributed. Of course, our Splunk also we can go for centralizing the manner for observing what are the logs files are generated and for searching. Question number 20, how does Spring Cloud handle services versioning and compatibility? There is no direct approach in Spring Cloud, okay, but we can handle them by using a standard API design, semantic versioning, backward compatibility support, and maintaining API contracts. You can use Spring Cloud contract that can verify the compatibility between service versions. Okay, in case of consumer driven contracts we have, and we can even use API gateways and service registration that can manage and route to a different versions of services based on the compatibility. Thank you for watching this video. Please subscribe our channel for more videos.